requests in the comments. Continue to pray for my mother. I'm believing that by the end of this week, middle of this week, coming up, she will be back home. She is improving. She sounded very good when I talked to her today. So I'm gonna wait for a few of you to get on the live. Like I've been saying for a couple of weeks, I'm gonna read a chapter of this a week with you guys, and then maybe do some Q&A afterwards. If you want to get this book, it's on Amazon, Through the Fire to Be on Fire. It's pretty much part of my testimony in the beginning of the book, and then just different things that the Lord has taught me through the different seasons of my life, whether up, down, good, bad, ugly, different seasons of my life. He would give me different lessons, different messages of inspirations, which kept me, through suicidal thoughts, kept me through all kinds of stuff. All right. So I'll wait for a couple of you to log in, and then we'll begin reading. If you got a prayer request, feel free to put in the comments. And like I said, at the end of this video, we will do some Q&A. All right. So Lord, just bless this reading in Jesus' name. So if you got the book, you can follow along with me. Jump. Go ahead and do it. You're never going to do anything great with your life. You will never accomplish your dreams. You will never preach. They will never accept you. Nobody loves you. No one likes you. Something is wrong with you, and that's why your dad isn't in your life. Your mom wishes you were never born. If you want the pain to stop, just jump and end this misery. Your father doesn't care about you. Your mother doesn't love you. You are just a big burden to everybody. They hate you. A full-on assault of words flooded my mind. I stood looking down at the traffic rushing by on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, contemplating suicide. These voices in my mind were a common thing, but this night it was particularly bad. They were extremely loud, and I had no volume switch. These were the kind of words that cut deep and left bruises on my heart and soul. They didn't just come and go, they left an impression and a mindset. Even if the voices went away, I would later wonder and contemplate if what they were saying was really true. I spent hours overanalyzing and questioning people's intentions and motives. I overthought everything. It made me shy, a nervous wreck, and my interactions with people were quite odd at times. At only 12 years old, my mind was constantly bombarded with these negative thoughts and words. I was a burden I carried with me all the time. I heard these voices when I looked in the mirror, when I interacted with people, and even when I laid my head on my pillow to sleep at night. There was a constant war going on inside my mind. Sometimes I shook off the thoughts and focused on school, basketball, or other activities I did with my childhood friends. The activities were a temporary escape, not a fix. They simply became distractions that only lasted for a short period of time. As soon as the distractions were gone, the thoughts came rushing in again. I spent a lot of my childhood inside my head trying to escape what was going on there. I daydreamed and read books, another form of escape. I wanted relief from those thoughts that would make me feel depressed and rejected. I wanted to interact with people without always wondering if they hated me or disliked my face. I wondered if they thought I was stupid or something else. Everywhere I went, I felt people were always judging me. The voices in my mind gave me the verdict. They hate you. They all think you're stupid. I remember feeling so overwhelmed that I literally shook my head trying to get the thoughts out. I screamed into my pillow at night, and sometimes I just screamed inside. I started to believe the lies the enemy was speaking to my mind because they were often wrapped in a little bit of truth. My mother and others had called me a few names before, and I knew I wasn't the smartest kid in class. Those things made it seem like the words I was hearing were true. I would do my schoolwork and sometimes think, maybe I am stupid. Day after day, I was worn down by the constant attack on my mind. It shaped how I saw myself as a person. One evening, my mother and I got into a heated argument and we both exploded. I grabbed my skateboard and told her I was running away. I fled from the house as my mother yelled after me. I don't even remember what we were arguing about. I just know that the thoughts I constantly battled in my mind made everything seem much worse. I ran down the stairs and ventured out into the cold night. I cried as I ran from my house. My heart felt like it was going to explode inside my chest. I didn't know where I was going, so I started heading toward the lake. I loved being down by the lake because it was calm and refreshing. Not tonight, though. Tonight, everything felt completely different than what I was used to. I had never been out alone at night running around on the street. It felt weird being out that late at such a young age. I knew I was vulnerable. I remember hearing sirens going off in the distance. She called the police on me, I thought to myself. I ran down a side alley to make sure no one saw me. The farther I ran, the louder the enemy's voice got. I felt like the enemy was trying to lead me to a dark place. I clearly remember the voice of the enemy speaking to me those same old words as I climbed the bridge that went over a highway. As the car sped below me, I looked down in tears, wondering if it would be better to just end my life right now. I could feel the cold hands of death closing in around me. It was very dark, cold, evil feeling. In that moment, I lost all hope and felt myself submitting to the darkness. It was almost like being in a pool that was filling up. I could feel something all around me. It was a smothering, cold presence that wanted to drown me. Right when I felt myself falling into the black, I felt a hand grab the back of my neck. There was no one physically there with me, but I know I felt a hand grab my neck. The hand was strong and warm, especially in the midst of the cold and evil presence around me. As I stood looking down at the lights of the cars flashing by, I felt tears falling down my face. I knew something had touched me. I shivered every time a cold gust of wind from the lake hit me, and I felt a powerful feeling start to overwhelm me. My body wanted to drop and float off into the darkness, but the hand was still holding me up. It was like warm oil running down my back. It was a warm, thick sensation that made me forget about the cold. In a weird way, it almost felt like the light was being poured on my back. I knew instantly, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I was having a real encounter with God. I can't find the words to describe it, but I just knew it was God. I had the sensation that I was wrapped in a warm blanket that was protecting me from the cold of the Chicago wind. Then a voice spoke to me, penetrating the darkness all around me. It was powerful, soft, and clear. It was like the voice of God and that He was standing behind me. Many people, even Christians, might say I'm crazy, but when I look back at what God spoke to me that night, in that moment, and then look at my life today, I know it was not my imagination, and I know I wasn't crazy. I lifted my head when I felt the warmth flow through my body. It felt like there was power flowing through my bones and bloodstream. I heard a voice say clearly, "Son, I love you. I have great plans for your life. Trust me. I want to use you greatly in this world to do great things for my kingdom." In that instant, I felt liberated. I felt freedom. All the weight that had me wanting to fall into the darkness vanished. I felt a power take over me that gave me new strength. Still in tears, I got off the bridge and walked back home. Those tears were not tears of sadness, but tears of joy. I had just had an undeniable encounter with God and had felt His love. I had heard so many sermons about Him. I had sung so many songs about His love. But this time I had a first-hand experience. There was an intimate moment that changed the course. This was an intimate moment that changed the course of my life forever. I didn't have the best childhood, and my family didn't have the easiest life. It was pretty rough and always changing. When I look back at it now from a father's perspective, I can digest how unhealthy it was. When I was a child, I was used to my environment and things that happened around me. I wasn't aware of many of the toxic circumstances and people in my life. I assumed those things were normal. Often, when we are surrounded by people who share our same issues and flaws, we don't realize how serious they are. My father was in the army, and my mother was a German woman who had left home to be with him. They had their own personal battles that affected me more than my younger siblings. My younger brothers and sister don't remember my father much, if at all, because my mother and father separated when I was only 6 years old. There were things going on between them that I never understood until I got older. As a child, whatever your parents show you is your normal. If you are not exposed to anything outside of that, it becomes your perspective and feels ordinary. So I was being affected emotionally and mentally without even realizing it. We moved often because my father was in the military. I do not remember having any stability or friends until my dad got out of the army and we moved back to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands where my dad was from. Before he got out of the military, we lived in Germany and Fort Polk, Louisiana. My mother stayed behind in Germany with my youngest brother, but my other siblings and I stayed with our father. He told me we're going to set things up in our new home and then my mother would join us. I didn't think anything was wrong, even though I recalled many arguments and fights they had had. I had even been pulled into the middle of some of them. The months flew by in St. Thomas. I played in the jungle like foliage and went to the beach on Christmas. It was a very interesting place to play as a child. There were all kinds of animals and creatures I had never seen in the States. I caught lizards and buckets full of small hermit crabs. Once my friends and I poured salt on a giant snail, which shrunk and sort of dissolved under the salt. Every day was an adventure. My brother and I even got chased by some bulls and got shot at when someone caught us playing with friends in an abandoned building on some older gentleman's property. I had some very interesting times. I spent a lot of time with my father one on one. The summer days were long but moved very fast with the friends I made. I didn't really notice that it took some time for my mother to come. Then the islands were hit hard during hurricane season. We went through a huge hurricane, and shortly after, my father told us our mother was coming. The hurricane was a wild experience. Ships were thrown out of the water onto the land, and roofs were completely blown off. During one hurricane, I woke up with a tarantula on my face. Right before another hurricane, my father sent me to the grocery store to buy some ice cream. The wind was so strong and I was so small that I felt like it was picking me up off the ground a little bit. I laugh about it now when I think of how crazy that was. It seemed fun at the time, but that was actually a very dangerous thing to do. Through it all, I was excited for my mother to be coming to live with us. When we went to pick her up at the airport, my father jokingly said we were going to tell her that we had ridden there on horses. When he told her that we were going to ride home on horseback, she did not look amused, and she stood there with my youngest brother in a stroller. My father thought, my first thought was that I had to get to know my brother because he was so small. My parents' arguments were different now that we were all living together again. We were in a very small apartment that wasn't big enough for the six of us. I doubt that my mother was very happy about it. Their arguments were much more serious now, and I found myself again caught up in the middle of them. I struggle with loyalty toward both my mother and my father. Sometimes they put me in a position that I had to take sides. Other times they would kick us kids out of the house while they argued. I realized then that something was off in my family. It got to the point where I couldn't ignore it. It made me sad when they argued. I don't really have any good memories of them together while we lived in St. Thomas. I can only remember the arguments. I felt very awkward and conflicted by some of the fights they had. Shortly after one of the hurricanes, my mother picked me up from my school in the middle of the day and took me straight to the airport with my brothers and sister. I was 6 years old. I found it quite strange when they pulled me out of class in the middle of the day. We got right on the plane and I didn't ask questions. I just fell asleep. I was so used to flying and moving that I figured this was just another one of those times. I assumed my father would join us later, just like my mother had joined us when we flew to St. Thomas. I woke up when we landed in Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, I thought to myself. The only place I had ever been in the States was Texas and Louisiana. We had no family in America, so I was very confused about what we were doing there. At the airport, we sat around like we didn't have anywhere to go. I started wondering where my dad was, what he was doing, and when he would meet us here. I asked my mother, when is daddy coming? She looked down and said, later, Marcus. I found out much later that my mother had used the last money she had saved to leave St. Thomas. Things had gotten so bad with her and my father that she felt God had released her to leave. Knowing our history and where my mother was from, it seemed to make more sense for her to return home to Germany and be with her family. When I asked her years later why she had chosen to move us to Chicago, she told me that God had instructed her to use the little money she had to buy tickets to Chicago. I found this completely amazing years later because there was no way this was a faith move by my mother. We had nothing, and she took herself and her 4 kids to a place she was completely unfamiliar with and where she had no connections. She was just confident that God had spoken to her about moving to Chicago. When we were all sitting on the chairs at the airport, a lady came up to my mother and asked her some questions. I guess we looked pretty lost sitting there together. She asked my mother if everything was okay and if she had a place to stay. My memory is kind of blurry on all the details, but we left the airport with the lady and she took us to a women's shelter called Rainbow House. We walked into that large house filled with women. Immediately, I felt uncomfortable because I seemed to be the oldest male child and there were no men anywhere to be found. We were instructed to sit with the other children in front of the television. They were watching Page Master. The movie took my mind off what was going on for a few moments. My mother eventually came and got us, and someone escorted us to a room where we were going to stay. I asked my mother every day when was my father coming. She rubbed my hair and told me he would be coming soon. Then she enrolled me and my youngest sister in school. We walked to school, which was a few blocks away. It wasn't in the best part of Chicago. Every day I came back to the shelter and asked my mother when was my father coming. Every day she gave me the same answer. Eventually I realized he wasn't coming, and I stopped asking. When I look back, I find it strange how I just adjusted to life without him. It makes me sad, but I think I was so used to moving around at an early age and not having stability that I somehow just blanked it out. I remember lying in bed some nights and wondering where my father was and if I would ever see him again for some reason. I never asked my mother about seeing him. I just accepted what it was, and that was the end of it. I never got a phone call or had any communication with my dad until I was about 22 years old. He found me on MySpace and messaged me. He was like a stranger to me, but the little boy in me was excited to have a conversation with him. Many years later, when I turned 32, I went to the islands to see him. We have stayed in contact ever since. My mother started in Chicago with nothing. She had used all her money on the plane tickets. She often took me on long walks as we went all over Chicago looking for jobs and apartments. We walked for miles, literally miles. My mom wasn't the type who was just going to sit around and wait for something to happen. She was going to find a way to make something happen. I can't even imagine how she managed to do everything she did without a car and with 4 kids. My mom eventually got a job working at a daycare center on the north side of Chicago. She moved out of the shelter and into a 3-bedroom apartment that wasn't too far from her job. We switched schools again, and my mother also enrolled in college. Our days started early because, as I said, my mother had no vehicle. She walked us to school, walked with my youngest brother to the daycare, and then took the bus to her school. That was her daily routine. After school, my siblings and I attended after-school programs run by the Chicago Park District. Our days were very long, and we were around many different types of people throughout the day. Most of the kids in the after-school program were from broken homes and often lived in government housing. It was a very interesting experience every day in this environment. It was very hard for my mother to get 4 kids around in the middle of the winter with no car. Strolled through the snow and many days stood in the cold waiting for the CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, bus to come. Chicago winters were very cold and the snow was very deep. I always felt like I was on a mountain climbing adventure as we made our way through the deep snow and winter winds that cut into our faces. I got into a lot of fights at school. I can't count how many times my mother had to come to school or buy me new glasses. I was always getting jumped in school because I refused to be bullied. Because of my stature, my thrift store clothes, and my nerdy glasses, I was a prime candidate for bullying in the eyes of some of my fellow students. They made fun of my mother for being white and being poor. It wasn't popular to be a mixed kid in a predominantly black area back then. I was looked at as less than because I wasn't fully black in their eyes. One of the ways I earned respect was through fighting. The kids figured out that if they said something, I was going to say something back, and if they said anything about my mother, I was going to swing. Over time, it became a repetitive thing. Every day, the same kids said the same old jokes about my mom or my clothes. Some days we got caught fighting, and other days we fought until the bell rang, and everyone just kind of walked away. My mother ended up leaving the daycare center where she worked and opening a home daycare. She worked very hard. Her hours started early in the morning and went as late as midnight. That was an example my mother set for me from an early age. I went to the same school as my upstairs neighbor, D'Angelo. He was 1 grade ahead of me because he had skipped a grade. We became best friends. I was excited to walk to school with him every day and play sports afterward. We had a lot of good times and made a lot of good memories for a short season. I felt I had finally adjusted to life in Chicago, even though it was rough. One day, when we were walking as a family, I forgot to put on a belt. My pants kept sagging, and I kept pulling them up. My mother decided at that moment that she wanted to homeschool me. In her deep German accent, she scolded me and said, "Marcus, you want to be like the boys and the gangsters around here? No way, not my son. You think you're so cool? It's done. You're in homeschool." I tried to argue with her, but she would not budge. I wasn't trying to be gangster at all. I simply couldn't find my belt that day. No matter how I pleaded or cried, my mother would not change her mind. Just like that, she pulled me out of school and kept me home. I was devastated. I had a best friend and I was going into the sixth grade and then falling in love with sports. In 3 more years, I would be getting ready to go to high school. I was extremely fast and I often played football with the older kids. We even had the neighborhood high school football coach come to the school one morning. And when he saw me, he pulled me to the side and told me that if I kept going, he could really use me on the team in a few years. I was so excited about playing football, but my mother would not change her mind. I was crushed and depressed. Just like that, my dreams of high school football and hanging with my friends went out the window. The first day my best friend left to go to school after summer was over, I had to stay home. He waved at me through the window, and I sat there watching him leave, feeling bitter inside. My life seemed to always be a series of transitions and never stable. Every time I got comfortable or started to settle down, things changed. At first, I was very upset, but homeschool eventually grew on me. Like when we left, my father moved to Chicago, somehow I adjusted to it. One of the big things that helped me adjust was getting a job when I turned 11. Mr. Pavlovic was my mother's landlord. My mother had asked him to teach me some things, and he decided to give me a try. He started me off with sweeping the corridors and washing windows, but eventually, over the years, he taught me how to paint and do minor construction. Then he put me in charge of the maintenance and cleaning of all his 4 buildings. I started working my own hours when I was just cleaning, but eventually I started working 8 to 10 hour days at 11 years old. I did my homework in the evenings, and Mr. Pavlovic picked me up in his red van at 9 a.m. every day, and I worked with him all day until 5 p.m. Some days we worked longer if we were preparing an apartment for a new tenant. I worked extremely hard for this man for $2 an hour. I never realized how bad that was until I got older. He could give me a $20 bill at the end of the day and I would run away smiling. The first time he gave me 20 bucks, I actually hugged him. It is an understatement when I say he had me working hard. I cleaned and carried fridges, stoves, and other heavy things up and down flights of stairs all by myself by strapping them on my back or dragging them by the straps. Often I worked by myself. Mr. Pavlovic would leave me in the apartments and give me instructions to clean the bathrooms and kitchen floors. When it was time to paint, we would ride around looking for a few Mexicans who were willing to do a day's work for cheap. Many days I found myself in apartments painting with a bunch of guys who didn't speak English. They played their music and I just went into one of the bedrooms and painted while they worked together in the other room. When I think about it now, I can't believe how hard I worked as a child. I look at my children who are about the same age I was back then and I just find it hard to believe. My self-esteem was very low. I was very shy, and the wounds from losing my father always had me looking for validation. Sometimes Mr. Pavlovic yelled at me very harshly and asked me if I was stupid when I didn't get something right the first time. I had a strong desire to get his approval. I did the job the best that I could and hoped when he inspected it that he would tell me the job was well done. He was very hard on me. Once I tore down a whole apartment's drywall by myself. I wore a mask to protect myself because the building was old. My arms were very tired from smashing the hammer into the drywall and tearing everything down. I looked in the mirror afterward and saw my face was gray. I was covered in dust from head to toe. Sometimes I hated it, but I loved getting paid, and that was my motivation. I worked hard during the summer months when other kids were playing. I was cleaning windows, cutting grass, or working on the roof as I watched kids come home from school or head to the park. If I finally finished early, I went to the basketball courts. I walked for about 10 blocks just to play at the court everybody went to. I stayed until they turned the street lights off, and then I went home. As the years went by, Mr. Pavlovic started paying me better and giving me greater responsibility. By the time I was 17, I was working for him and one of my wife's friends at the side for $9 an hour, My mother and I didn't always have the greatest relationship. I was her first child, and she was very hard on me. I don't regret it, nor do I blame her. She did very well in such a difficult situation. She raised all of us by herself with no help from my father, not even financially. She never had any strange men around us and never did anything but be with us all the time and take care of us and about seven other kids at one point. One Christmas, before she put me in homeschool, she brought me a Chicago Bulls warm-up suit and some Reeboks. That was a big deal because all our clothes came from the thrift store and I was constantly being made fun of. The first time I walked into school with the gear my mother had brought me, my classmates literally went crazy. I'm not exaggerating. My mother and I had discussions as I got older about verbal and physical abuse. She would whip me out of anger and frustration. I used to think she hated me. I was smart enough to know we were poor and didn't have much money, which is why she worked super hard. My mother has been open about saying she abused me. To be honest, I think most kids my age were abused in the way we got whipped when we were younger. I couldn't imagine whipping my kids the way I got beat. Many of us got beat out of our parents' frustration and anger. There's a huge difference between that and just getting a small whipping for doing wrong. My mother also was not very big on affection. Most of my relationship with her was her yelling at me, calling me stupid, and things like that. I can't remember her even telling me she loved me when I was a child. The crazy thing is that I think she did an excellent job and I don't regret any of it. Some might look at the relationship I had with her and the things I went through and want to trade me their life if they could, but I wouldn't. She did the best she could with what she had, and I am forever grateful. I wouldn't change anything about my childhood and how things went with my mother. She was only able to give me what she had been given to her, and that was the best she had. I highly encourage you to read her book to get an even greater perspective of all this as she dives into things a little deeper. I believe it would be very helpful for many single mothers and children without fathers to understand my mother's perspective. I remember one time she was going off on me so badly that she kicked me out. I ran out of the house, grabbed my skateboard, and didn't think to grab anything else. I slept outside for 3 nights in the freezing cold. I did not wash or eat and just drank water in the city parks. You know you stink when you can smell yourself, and my goodness, I stunk. But my pride wouldn't let me go home. I remember the enemy trying to make me feel like my mother did not love me. I remember lying on the cold ground inside of a skate park and a police officer approaching me, asking me what I was doing there. I took off running because I didn't want him to take me home. I got so hungry and I was thinking so much by the third day that I eventually went back home and my mother and I reconciled. I look back and I laugh now thinking about how I made the smart emotional decision to grab my skateboard and not a sweater or anything else. That was 3 of the worst and longest days of my life. My mom and I had our ups and downs, but the highlight of my week was always going to church on Sunday. I had some friends and the ability to socialize outside of my family and the daycare kids, which was rare. Before my mother had a car, we always took the bus to church on Sunday. We stood in the snow and felt like we were freezing while we waited for the bus to come. It took us almost 45 minutes to get to church, and we would usually stay all day. We got there at 10 a.m. and didn't leave till almost 5 p.m. If the weather was nice, we stayed for evening service. My mom eventually got a car, a golden Toyota Corolla that was very rusted. I recall driving to church and watching the street pass underneath us through the holes in the floor. I used to be so embarrassed when we went anywhere in that car. It was clear to me and everyone else that we were poor. Nevertheless, I enjoyed going to church. I got involved in the youth ministry and made a few close friends. I faced some of the same battles I faced going to public school because my mother was white and we were mixed. I even got bullied in church. I earned my respect by fighting, can you believe that, in church, and standing up for myself to those who tried to bully me. To this day, I'm still friends with some of those guys, as weird as that might seem, especially since I'm talking about church. I had my first girlfriend at that time and ended up learning some life lessons the hard way. When I got a little older, I could ride the bus by myself, so I often stayed at church longer than my family. It was cool to have that freedom. Every Sunday was a huge adventure for me. The bus ride each way was at least 30 minutes. I soaked up every minute of it as I got older. Some of my friends stopped going to church. Eventually, I started going to church that was closer to my house. I was 17 years old when I started attending this church when I met the first girl I could say I fell in love with. She opened my eyes to a lot of things and not in a good way. She was a few years older and more advanced in a few things. I was a virgin and I always had to fight the temptation she threw at me. I dated her for a long time on and off. This is significant because it shaped the way I saw women and my behavior for a long time. She came to my job one day and told me we had to talk. I was sitting upstairs at the piano playing with the keys when I got a sick feeling in my stomach. I knew the talk was not going to be a good one. She started crying and told me she was pregnant. I knew, of course, it was not mine because I was still a virgin. I broke down in tears. I was crushed. I called my mother on the phone and then walked home crying like a baby. She was my first serious heartbreak. If you've ever had your heart broken, especially if it's by the first person you think you love, you know the pain I was feeling. It almost felt like I was a candle melting away as I dragged my heavy feet home, crying to my mother on the phone. I started going back to my mother's church for a few months after that incident. Things were good at times, but I always felt the burden of being poor and kind of rejected everywhere we went. When we went to the white church, my mother was the divorced woman with four black kids. When we went to the black church, my mother was the white divorced woman with four mixed kids. As I grew older, my mother was still hard on me. I started taking college classes after completing my GED. Almost done, guys, but something just did not sit right with me as I took my classes. I felt there was something else for me. The tension between me and my mother only made the feeling much stronger. I eventually felt like something just had to change in my life, and I enlisted in the U.S. Army. Once the thought hit my mind about enlisting, it did not take long for me to follow through. I just knew it was what I wanted to do. I went to the military center by my neighborhood high school. I could see myself in the Navy, even though I couldn't see myself in the Navy, even though we were the only ones who had an active duty base in Illinois. I could not see myself in the Marines, even though they had a really cool uniform. I just knew in my heart it was the Army for me. I decided to join the reserve so I could still come back to Illinois and be in Chicago. I was not ready to completely leave my family and move to another state. This was around the time many soldiers were being deployed to Iraq after 9/11. So as you know, there was a lot of tension in the Middle East. I went through all of the testing and paperwork feeling extremely excited. There was no doubt in my mind that I was making the right choice. I figured I would join up and do 20 years, retire early, and become a cop. I wanted to have some kind of security for my family and my mother in the future. We had always been poor, and I knew one day my mother probably wouldn't be able to work anymore. If she didn't get married again, who would take care of her? So I felt the best thing to do was act now. I could never see myself working at a fast food joint or anything that wasn't going to contribute to my long-term goals. I felt like I would be wasting my time at any of those places because it would be temporary. The day the recruiter came to pick me up, my mother was crying. I had never seen her cry before, and since then, maybe once. I can still see clearly in my head her red face with tears coming down. She looked like she wanted to say something to me, but she never did. I thought I was doing her a favor by joining the Army. I thought it would be one less burden, one less thing she would have to worry about. My brother Maurice walked me to the car and hugged me. He looked incredibly sad as the car pulled off. I stared out the back window and watched my brother shrink the further we pulled away. It was one of the saddest days of my life. Even writing these words, I get teary-eyed because my family had no other family. It was just us five. Thinking about everything that happened since that day, I always wonder how things would have worked out if I had stayed home and never left. I went through basic training at Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina. I loved every minute of it, the running, the camaraderie, the obstacle course, and all of the drills. They just blew my mind. Joining the Army started off sadly, but it was the greatest experience of my life by far. When I say I loved being a soldier, I loved it from day one. Training was like walking into the really cool world of everything I ever wanted to do. It challenged me, it pushed me, and it built my confidence because I was good at it. The only sad day I had was graduation day. My family was not able to make it. I remember standing in formation looking at all the families, hoping my family was out there, and knowing they were not. I remember the pain I felt and the tears I fought back when our drill sergeants released us to greet our families. I was actually embarrassed, and I felt everyone was looking at me like I was a weirdo for not having anyone there to embrace me. One other kid I knew who didn't have any family show up either. So we hung out at the PX together for the rest of the day. I followed up my basic training with advanced individual training, AIT, in Fort Eustis, Virginia. It was a beautiful place. I fell in love with the air and everything about it. It was much more chill than the city of Chicago. AIT was much easier than basic training. They gave us more freedom, and we were there for only a few weeks to learn what our military jobs would be. I had chosen 88 Hotel. My recruiter told me it would be similar to working at UPS or being in some kind of shipping and warehouse job. They taught me how to drive and operate huge machinery for the logistical side of the Army. I drove cranes on ships and learned how to operate forklifts and container handlers. I had a good experience during my 8 weeks of AIT. I loved it so much that I was already considering switching from the reserves to active duty. The only thing I couldn't get over was missing my family back home. I felt like my life was perfect, but I wanted to be around them again. After graduation, I went back to Chicago. Since I only had to go to drill once a month, I enrolled in college and started looking for jobs. I got a job at the airport working for UPS and another job working at a factory in the afternoon. It was a completely different feeling coming back to Chicago as part of the military. I had accomplished something and I felt good about myself. I had a confidence I had never felt before, and I saw how it translated to my everyday life. Things were good at home with my family, but I felt something was going to change. I went to my drill a few times and it just didn't give me the same exciting feeling I had when I was on active duty training. The reserves were very relaxed and the individuals in charge did not seem to take it seriously as active duty. After a few months, there were rumors floating around that we would deploy. I immediately decided I did not want to stay in the reserves, but wanted to switch over to active duty. There was no way in the world I was going to deploy to Iraq with these guys. I didn't feel safe. To make matters worse, reserve soldiers deployed for a much longer period than active duty soldiers because they had to use an additional 6 months to get prepared to go. A lot of reserve soldiers, when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, they were deployed for like a total of 15 months. I went even 18 months in some cases. I went back to my recruiter and told her I wanted to go on active duty. They started the process, and before I knew it, I had orders to ship out. I said goodbye to my mother and my family once again. It was hard, but at least this time I had some experience, and I was far more confident than I had been before. I left Chicago again, thinking this was temporary, and I would just get myself together and come back home and be a cop. I received orders to be stationed at Fort Eustis, Virginia. I was excited about that because I had fallen in love with Virginia while in AIT. I left Chicago and tried to keep my relationship strong back home. Eventually, I talked to my friends less and less. I decided to end things with the girl I had been talking to for a few months. The distance in my schedule made it hard for us to stay close. I started going to a few churches when I first got there, but after not finding ones that felt right, I ended up not going at all. I became real close friends with some of the people from my unit. Many of us lived in the barracks together and we hung out on the weekends. One weekend, one of my female friends invited me to go to the club. I always was a big dancer, so I went. Eventually, that became my normal. I started picking up a lot of the traits of my military buddies. I cursed and partied, but I never got into drinking or sex, and at 19 years old, I had still managed to hold on to my virginity. Needless to say, I backslid during my first year in the military. I ended up hooking up with one of my female friend's roommates, and she would end up becoming my wife and the mother of my first 3 children. I won't go into all the details of that, but I would say that the 2 back-to-back deployments killed that marriage. So, I got married pretty young. I think we were married for about 6 months, and then they deployed me to Iraq for a year. I came back, was in Virginia for about another year, and then they deployed me to Afghanistan for a year, which, I'm about to read that. We had only been married for about 7 months when they shipped me off to Baghdad, Iraq. My daughter was born about a month after I left, a day after my birthday. I remember the long hot days standing in the sun, sweating in 110 to 120 degree heat, wishing I could go home. I remember the attacks, the rockets flying into camp, and wondering every day if I would get killed by an IED, a suicide bomb, or a sniper fire. I saw a lot of crazy things during my deployment. After being gone for a year, we came back for about a year. My marriage was pretty much rough, and it often felt like I had just kind of picked up right where my childhood had left off with the fighting and yelling. Just as I don't blame my mother, I don't blame my ex-wife for anything. We were both young, and I didn't understand women or know what marriage took or what it meant to be a man, let alone a man of God. The Bible says people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, and my marriage definitely suffered because of a lack of knowledge and experience. I looked at the states differently now. I realized how unappreciative and ungrateful people in America are, and it put a bad taste in my mouth. My wife and I were going to church, and we dragged our marriage along that year, and as soon as things seemed to kind of settle, a change started to peek its head over the horizon. Once again, my unit heard rumors that another deployment was coming. Unfortunately, the rumors were true. I got orders to deploy again, this time to Kandahar, Afghanistan. This deployment was unbelievably bad for my spiritual and even worse for my marriage. I backslid once again and was involved in adultery and other messes. I was very confused about how to handle adversity in relationships. I could not seem to understand my wife, and I had no one I could turn to for sound advice. I cheated as a way to cope with the stress of war and not being able to see my children or confront the issues I was having in my marriage. I often thought I was going to die without repenting and going to hell. I'm going to stop right there, guys. This is the longest chapter in the book because pretty much it just was laying a foundation of my past, giving you some background on myself. So the next time I get on here, I'm going to mark this page and I'm going to pick it up again. Once we get to the actual chapters where I'm just talking about the things that the Lord has shown me over the years, those are a lot shorter. so we can read them quickly, and then we can, discuss and do some QA. Yeah, like chapter 2 is flying and crashing, and it's about 5-6 pages long. So this first chapter is really long, but I appreciate you guys hanging in there. So, any questions about that, or any questions in general? I want to give you guys some time just to ask a question or two, and then I'm gonna go upstairs and spend some time with the babies. So there's always gonna be criticism and haters in the comments. It's funny, like, people don't like you, but just like Jesus, they would, follow Jesus, they would stalk Jesus, they would, try to trap him with trick questions, and they would accuse him and ridicule him. They did it to everybody in the Bible. So I'm so used to it. No, I can't speak German. Yeah, I know I got weirdos on here. I've got a lot of people that are really obsessed with me, but it's all good, just pray for them. They don't stop anything, they don't change anything. As you look back, was there a moment when you realized God was with you and you didn't realize it in that moment? I always say, the older saints used to testify. They say, when I look back over my life, I see how God's hand was in everything. Obviously, the day I was going to commit suicide at 12 years old, that was the first, encounter that I really had with God. But one of the biggest things was, if you guys was here from the beginning, when God gave my mother that word to move to Chicago, she had no money. We were living, in a shelter. We have no family in America. So it didn't make sense, for her to go to Chicago, other than, it would make sense maybe if she decided, oh, I'm going to go back to Louisiana, because we lived in Louisiana, but it would make more sense for her to move back to Germany where her family was. And so she says God told her to take us out of school in the middle of the day, take us straight to the airport, and buy plane tickets to Chicago. And so when we got to Chicago, we had nowhere to stay. She had no more money. She had no savings. We were just sitting in the airport, and this lady just happens to come up to my mom, who just happens to work for a shelter. And she asked my mom, is, everything okay? My mom explains to her the situation, and she takes us to the shelter. And now to see everything that we are doing in Chicago, the Firehouse Church, to see where we came from, it's clear that, God did speak to my mother. It's clear that God, did tell her, to go to Chicago. We see the fruit of that now. Yes, you said, do you now feel that everything that you encountered had to happen for you to be who and where you are today? Yes, that's why I said I don't regret anything that, happened with my mom. I don't regret none of those things, because it made me who I was. That's why I have, the title, Through the Fire to Be on Fire. Going through the fire, going through the trials, going to the different storms. There were things about me that changed. I never had a father, in my life, to teach me how to be a man, how to be a husband, how to be a father. So a lot of things I learned the hard way. A lot of things I learned through trial and error. And so I don't regret anything. Honestly, I wouldn't change anything. If anything, I'm just thankful for the grace of God. I'm thankful that, he forgives us, for our mistakes and, the stupid things that we do, the things that we do out of ignorance. He's just a good God. Mhm. I'm glad you reconciled with your dad, but did you make peace with your mom? I love my mom. As you guys know, my mom is in the hospital right now. Me and my mom have an excellent relationship. She goes to my church. She's teaching the women on a constant basis. She's going to be in charge of the school. You see the school that we're building on the side of the church. So she's going to run that school. It's going to be a private school for Chicago is really bad with the schooling, that liberal agenda, the LGBTQ, and everything that you're trying to push. So I just want to open up a place where, they might feel like they don't have options or they can't afford like private school. I want to open up a place that they can come and just, it'd be an option to get teaching, from some believers from a biblical perspective. What is the title of your mom's book? I think I have it down here. Give me 1 second. Don't worry about the haters and negative people in the comment. Like, I'm happy they're here because when they pop up, it just shows you, you're doing something right because the Bible said they would be there. Let's see. Oh, give me 1 second, guys. I know I have a copy of it somewhere. It's called Crown to Serve, Maria P. Rogers. I'll have a copy of it next time. But I just saw this. I figured I'll show you guys this. It's pretty cool. So that's when we came to Chicago, right there. It's me and my siblings. That's my mother right there. That's me and my sister, my younger brother, my other brother. That's me with the big old buck tooth right there. You see, I was always pretty. I'm kind of chubby now, but you see that picture where we're sitting on the couch, I got a six-pack. You see that? I came out, my mom, with a six-pack. I don't know what happened. It's one of my favorite pictures of me and my sister. Uh-oh. Some of these are kind of funny. This is my sister's graduation, my brother Maurice, my brother Marvin. Yeah, I don't know what I thought I was doing right here. That's me and my brother Maurice. It's Maurice and Romy. Yeah. That's me and my oldest daughter, Miriam. That's my babies. This is actually right after Afghanistan. We're literally right after. That's my lady, chunky cheeks. That's grandma with the babies. Let's see what we got. That's Maria's graduation. Me and Noah. A couple more pictures in here. Just pictures with the babies, the kids. Oh, yeah, these are some of my favorites right here. I really like these. The one with my boys. Wedding pictures. Wifey in the hospital when mine came along. Bunch of baby pictures. Look at her hair. Oh, man. What do we got? Oh, yeah, I like these. All the girls and then Noah doing a project. I remember I went around the house and I took pictures of everybody sleeping. I don't know. I just caught them all one night. Me and the wife. And she makes me look good. I don't know why she got with me. My mother and wife bonding in Vegas. They had a conference. My wife taking Maria and Noah to IHOP. That kind of became a bonding thing. Me and my brothers and my two sons at our first Bulls game. My mom speaks Spanish. She speaks German. She speaks French. And yeah, something else. This is our TV show in Las Vegas. This is actually one of my mother's daycare kids. And so I remember when I was reading the story, I said that she would have kids coming from like 5 in the morning, and they would stay till midnight, and the parents would come pick them up at midnight. So he spent a lot of time. This one as well. They're actually cousins, and they moved to Texas, but they are Christians to this day. Because my mother just points. They're like, we literally think of them, as our brothers. They literally grew up in our house, a lot. So that's when we went to Noah's Ark in Kentucky, preaching conference, one of the first firehouse services. My wife made this book for me, so I'm just sharing it with you guys. This is Ali. Now, some of you have seen this story. This is something that people comment negative about, or they make they've made videos about. But this soldier, I baptized him while I was in the army, and then right after he drowned. Now, as you can see here, I just baptized him. The water's low. It's not crazy or anything like that. But we got out of the water after the baptism, and there were some soldiers like on the other side, and they were jumping like in the current. And so, some of the soldiers wanted to jump in and jump in the current. And so we watched, a couple of other soldiers do it, and we all jumped in. And unfortunately, the current took him away, and, he drowned, So I didn't, a lot of people, they've attacked me about this for years because, they believe what they want to believe. They say, I drowned him. They say, I baptized him in some like crazy water and stuff like that. But you can see the water is perfectly calm. He was so happy. He was an ex-Muslim, and he wanted to get baptized and become a believer. This is in South Korea. My wife made this for me, so just some random pictures with the kids. Y'all keep praying for my mom. She said, Marcus, I chose this to be the last picture because it captures the essence of who you are. You lift Jesus up before anyone else, and he gives you the grace and strength to lift up the rest of us. I decided to have this album made for you so you can always have these memories close to you. You are appreciated, admired more than you know. Jesus has brought you through so much, and I can't wait to see where he'll take you next. You are the best husband I could ever ask for. Know that you forever have my love and support. Your wife. So we had just got done baptizing a bunch of people in Vegas, and so she decided to use this particular picture. So love you guys. I'll probably, like I said, I'll do this once a week, maybe on Friday evenings. So next Friday we'll revisit and we'll come back. My kids are getting restless over there. They're starting to make a lot of noise. So yeah. Oh yeah. Let me just address this. I know you guys always tell me to not address the negative matter of fact, no, I'm not going to address it because it doesn't matter. They're going to believe what they want to believe. So I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. I thank you for all the prayers. Hopefully next week I'll be able to, well, next week on the 2nd, I'll be going live with the keys in my hand. And I just really appreciate all of you who supported me through the good, bad, ugly, through the last 7 or 8 years. It means a lot. So just keep praying for me. And y'all have a wonderful evening in Jesus' name. All right. I'm going to go spend some time with my family.